Scientists say that our generations, aka millennials and Gen Z, are the last that can prevent the catastrophic threat of the climate crisis. And while our predecessors have gridlocked environmental action with partisan politics, the good news is young Americans are actually willing to work across the aisle to find solutions to save our planet. Even President Joe Biden's $2 trillion American Jobs Plan, which is an infrastructure program to rebuild our post-pandemic economy, incorporates a transition to clean energy and attempts to tackle climate change at the same time. But will Republicans sign on? Ironically, conservatives were the original conservationists in this country. In the early 1900s, President Theodore Roosevelt established wildlife and nature preserves, including 5 national parks. And President Richard Nixon started the Environmental Protection Agency. But the party's leadership perspective has done a 180, and many GOP politicians put the monetary interests of fossil fuel corporations over the future of our world. And today, Democrats are known to champion environmentally friendly policies, including the progressive left's Green New Deal, which is a sweeping proposal that calls for net zero carbon emissions by 2030. So far, partisan politics have gotten in the way of this and comprehensive legislation. But luckily, the majority of us believe in the climate crisis. And we've seen prominent voices emerge from both parties, including Benji Backer and Jamie Margolin. So I wanted to know, is it possible for young Americans to put aside our ideological differences and come together in the fight to save the planet?
It is an issue that spans long before the Industrial Revolution. A lot of people understand the climate crisis as something that started when we started emitting fossil fuels into the air. And that is scientifically where it started. But in terms of the actual roots of the crisis, it started with colonialism and colonization. It started with the roots of capitalism. It started with when settlers and colonizers came to the Americas and other places that they colonized and started treating the land, the water, the people there as resources to extract from. And those same systems of oppression, colonialism, racism, patriarchy, and the capitalism are the reason why we are in this climate crisis. Those are the systems at the root of it. And the climate crisis is an issue of social justice. Roughly 69% of all coal plants are built in Black communities, and that is not a coincidence. The climate crisis is not the problem, it's the symptom of the problem. It's the symptom of extraction, of capitalism, of racism, of patriarchy, of colonialism. It's a symptom of these problems. And we are not going to be able to solve the climate crisis until we get to the root of these issues and dismantle these systems.
We are in this place right now where the future of the planet is inextricably tied to capitalism, for better or for worse, especially with Biden's plan, which is a $2 trillion infrastructure plan, of which his deputy White House climate advisor said the output of good economic policy is good climate outcomes. What do you think of this statement?
I think capitalism plays a really important role in how we solve climate change. The world is a capitalist society in a lot of ways. We're always trying to innovate new things. We're always trying to figure out ways to make things cheaper and help people from all over the globe become a part of a first world economy. And to do that, we are going to need to continue innovating and continue with new technology. And I think that now this capitalism of the past, which was kind of how we got to where we are now, needs to be transformed into the capitalism for the future, which is a greener future. You look at a country like China or a country like India that are ramping up their emissions dramatically. The only way that is not going to happen in the future is if we create more technology that allows them to do things in a cleaner, also more prosperous way.
And Jamie, what do you make of this? I know that you're coming from a perspective in which colonialism is part of the problem, as you just said. What do you think of the statement, the output of good economic policy is good climate outcomes?
This whole white supremacist mindset of trying to get the rest of the world to be more like these rich white countries develop. Obviously, in terms of development, in terms of technology and stuff like that, I completely get that. But in terms of wanting to aspire to our lifestyle, the American lifestyle is highly toxic and is the reason why we're in this problem in the first place. Now, what does this look like tangibly? What is like decolonization? What is returning to the wisdom that is scientific and is true? Let's talk about wildfires, for example. Indigenous people in California had very strategic ways of land management, of strategic burns and things like that to manage the wildfires in a way that prevents them from getting to how bad that they are now. And so there have been conversations of if Indigenous people are are involved again in terms of having the power to control how the land is managed in terms of regulating wildfires, then that would be a huge part of solving the wildfire issues. Back in my family's home country of Colombia, unregulated capitalism is the reason why environmentalists are getting murdered. These loggers, these corporations that are going in and that are taking away from the most biodiverse place in the world, that are taking the lungs of the planet. The Amazon rainforest is the lungs of our planet. We are not going to survive this climate crisis without the Amazon and the green spaces of our world. And unregulated capitalism is the reason why these corporations are coming in there and deforesting, and they're murdering the people who are trying to stop them. The climate crisis is not like just the environment in a silo. It intersects with all levels of our society. And so the climate crisis affects health, and people need healthcare in terms of the higher rates of asthma, lung cancer, all of these things, natural disasters causing injuries, everything. People need financial support in terms of the way that different communities are being hurt by the climate crisis and the financial strain of the climate crisis. One thing that I love about the Green New Deal is it addresses healthcare and social justice and indigenous sovereignty. I think the solution to a lot of these issues is addressing this intersectionally.
I love that you also said the Green New Deal is more of something it might not be the solution, but it might also be what it stands for, that's what's important. And I wanted to bring up that Benji's organization, the American Conservation Coalition, was behind the only climate-related bill that passed Congress last year, the Energy Act of 2020. Benji, can you tell us a little bit about that? And why didn't you guys support the Green New Deal at the same time?
It's a really great question, and we will not solve climate change by trying to focus on things that don't have to do with climate change. It only holds us back. We have differences as Americans on a lot of issues, and the world is more complex than red versus blue and conservative versus liberal, but the reality is different parts of the country have different opinions on a whole bunch of different things. Urban America and rural America, there's a real divide there, and if we start to put other issues in the climate conversation, it holds us back. I have many other issues that I care about as a conservative, as an American, as a young person, and those issues can be solved, but we need to have those in separate conversations because separate issues have separate allies, and if we divide America over climate policy because we're putting everything into the same bucket, it's going to be really hard to solve the crisis. I believe in bipartisanship. I believe in cross-ideological opportunities. And I think that we can get there, as we saw last year with, once again, the largest investment in climate change policy in American history. If you're talking about people being affected by climate change in minority communities, in areas where the pollution is higher or where it's harder to have clean air and clean water, and it's difficult to have a livelihood that other people are able to have, that should absolutely be a part of climate policy. What I'm talking about is putting together a climate plan that has completely distant issues, like talking about childcare programs or public sector unions or community colleges, even healthcare, talking about healthcare for all. Like those might be very important issues. I agree that a lot of those are very important issues, but there is a difference between lumping everything in with climate change and talking about the effects of climate change and the policies that matter.
You said we don't have time to wait for a Green New Deal. Who says I was waiting for a Green New Deal? I need that passed now. I'm not sitting around waiting, praying for a Green New Deal. We have the House, the Senate, and the White House. If the Democrats get their act together, we could pass the Green New Deal. There's this fantasy within capitalism that is there's eternal economic growth and you can just keep growing and growing and growing, but our planet can't sustain that. Our planet simply cannot sustain that economic model. That's not because, Jamie's a leftist, so she believes that. Scientifically, our planet cannot sustain capitalism. The system isn't broken, it's working exactly the way it was built. This is a country that was built on the genocide of over 90 million indigenous people and then built on slavery. And we're trying to say, we can just reform it. We can just switch things here and there. No, we need to completely change it. The idea that we have to take gradual, slow steps is a myth because there is no gray area between survival. We either make it out of the climate crisis or we don't. And the reality is we do need to have these drastic sweeping actions. And that is what we need to get out of this climate crisis. And the way that we're going to help people is through action that puts communities first and is through regulating corporations. This idea that this fantasy world where they're going to regulate themselves, where we just laissez-faire, let them do their thing and somehow things are going to get better. That's literally why we're in the problem in the first place. And honestly, we do not have time to solve this climate crisis. We are already technically too late. So we have to have been taking action since yesterday. And I don't think we should try a method that has already failed. It's inconvenient for our current political system to do what actually needs to be done. And the action that we have to take is inconvenient. It is radical and it is going to be difficult. But the alternative is not surviving this, is literally destroying life on Earth. I wish that we weren't under such a timeline that we could deliberate and discuss and take our time and be incremental, but we simply don't have the ability to do that.
Benji, I wanted to know, because you've discussed wanting to scale back regulations and taxes related to this infrastructure bill, what do you say to criticisms that fighting such corporate taxes and regulations prioritize short-term profit over the future of the planet, given that much of the plan plans to use increased taxes to fund these climate change plans?
With this infrastructure plan, with COVID, the last thing that we need to do is start taxing the businesses that have been incredibly hindered by one of the greatest unexpected situations in global history. And to work on upgrading America's infrastructure shouldn't come at the expense of the people who employ Americans.